So, last time we turned our attention inward and focused on becoming more honest with ourselves, sitting with our true feelings, intentions, and past and maybe even present actions is really hard. It's not an easy thing to do at all, but if you can do it and just accept the reality of who you are in that moment, you'll also find something else. And that's going to be the topic for the day. You're going to find that you have a greater sense of ownership over yourself. Okay. What I mean by that is because you can sit with who you are, because you are no longer trying to fight or deny that this is who you are, because you've accepted it, you can now do something about it. And it's that ability to now do something about it that gives you real power and a real sense of responsibility. Okay. I'll try my best to unpack this a bit. Think for a second of when you have tried to avoid responsibility, right? We've all had these moments, but let's just take an example. Let's say you were supposed to meet a friend at like 2 p.m. sharp. Okay. It was a really important appointment, and it was important that you be there on time, right? Both of you agreed to this. It was made very clear the importance of it, that everyone needs to be out there on time. But you show up an hour late and didn't tell your friend that you'd be late. Right? So you didn't give them like a text or anything saying, hey, I'm running behind, right? Your friend is now angry at you for both being late and not giving him a heads up. Okay. Here's the reality. You're responsible for both of these things. Or you're responsible for being late and also not giving your friend a heads up, right? These are both things that, you did that you had promised not to do, right? Or maybe it was implicitly promised, right? Your friend has every reason to be upset with you, right? Your friend was sitting there for an hour, not knowing what's happening, time wasted, right? There's a lot of reasons for your friend to be upset with you. There's good reason, okay? If you were in a similar boat, you might feel the same way. Okay. Now, if you're trying to avoid that responsibility, you might make some excuse about how there was traffic or how your phone was on silent, you didn't hear the alarm. I don't know, like whatever the reason was that you did not show up on time and did not send a heads up message to your friend, right? Your first response, let's say, isn't to just accept responsibility, right? Just say that you screwed up, apologize, and then make an honest effort to be better about it in the future. Maybe find a way to make up for it, right? So why is that? Why is it that your first response isn't to just accept responsibility? Why is it that you're so keen on providing some explanation or a reason as to why you were late, a reason that you want your friend to just kind of accept, right? You want your friend to just be like, oh, I get it. Like, things happen. I understand, right? Like, that's probably the response that you were hoping to get. So maybe this is an oversimplification, but my guess is that you don't want to accept that you screwed up. Like, I think at the core of it, that's kind of what it is that you're looking for, right? You don't want your friend to believe you screwed up, or maybe you don't want to believe that about yourself. I mean, I don't know you, so I can't tell you what's going on in your own psyche, but let's run down the possibility of why it is that you're not just straightforwardly accepting responsibility for being late. One possibility is that you just don't want the consequences that come with dropping your responsibilities, right? But you have no problem with being irresponsible as if you don't even feel bad about it, in which case you're a fucking psychopath. Okay? If you just don't care that you're being irresponsible, that other people are depending on you, and then you let them down, but you just don't care, right? Okay, you don't have any empathy. You're a psychopath. Okay. Second possibility is that you do feel bad. Okay, so you're not a complete psychopath, but you don't want to accept the consequences that come with your actions just because the consequences are not pleasant ones, right? Like it doesn't feel good for a friend to be mad at you. It doesn't feel good for, somebody to express that to you. Maybe it doesn't feel good to try to make up for your mistakes because it costs you in some form or fashion, okay? In which case you care more about what happens to you than accepting responsibility. Okay, here's a third possibility. You're in denial and you don't think that you're responsible for what you did. even though every piece of evidence says otherwise, right? So, like, even though that there's a lot of things that you could have done differently that you didn't do, you just are in denial and say, like, it's not my responsibility to, do all these things that I could have done to make sure that I wasn't late. Okay. I'm going to just assume that you're not a psychopath, so we could eliminate the first possibility, right? And like a genuine psychopath is fairly rare. They do exist, but I'm going to assume that you are not one of them. Uh, if you're in the second camp, so you feel bad, you just don't want to accept the responsibility, the consequences of your mistake, right? Uh, at least you acknowledge that you screwed up, right? At least there's a part of you that acknowledges that, yes, you are responsible and then you screwed up. That tells me that you are at least aware of what you did, but still, you're a little bit of a bitch for trying to escape responsibility. Here's why. When you don't do your part, when you don't handle your own responsibilities, your obligations, at the end of the day, somebody pays the cost. You fuck over somebody else, right? It's not always obvious and it's not always visible, but it's there, right? So, like in this case, if you're late to this meeting with your friend without telling them, who ate the cost of your dropping the ball on this, right? It was your friend. Your friend was the one sitting around wasting their time waiting for you, not knowing, getting frustrated. Like they're eating the emotional cost. They're eating the, just the time wasted. If you don't do your part in a group project that needs to meet a deadline, who eats the cost? I mean, there's always going to be someone, right? The other team members that have to now pick up the slack for you, make sure the deadline's met. Let's say if you don't discipline your kids by setting appropriate boundaries, assuming you have kids, right? Who ends up eating the cost? The rest of society. Because now the rest of society has to deal with this psychopath that you've raised that just goes around violating everyone else's boundaries, right? There's never a time when somebody drops the ball on a responsibility and someone somewhere doesn't pay for it, right? There's always a cost to you. You're not doing your part. Okay. It's just not that obvious all the time. You might have to think about it a little bit, but if you think about this for a second, you'll realize I believe it's to a large degree true, right? Ideally, the person who is responsible should be the one paying the cost because they're the ones who should be taking ownership of whatever it is, the mess that they created, right? But if you avoid accepting the consequences of your decisions, of your behavior, then someone else is going to deal with the consequences. So when you don't accept your own responsibilities, like you don't take accountability for what you did as you did, and the consequences that come with it, you're essentially just pushing it off to somebody else, right? Like that's essentially what you're doing is that you're saying, hey, I'm prioritizing myself and my own needs or desires or whatever it is that I want from life. And I'm going to push over whatever it is at the cost of my screwing up or making mistakes or not taking care of the things I need to take care of. I'm going to push it off onto someone else, right? You know who else does that? That's right. The first camp of people, the psychopaths. Okay. Now, it might not be to the same extent, but still, there's a little bit of this psychopathy behavior. Okay. So, not a real good option. Okay. The third camp. This is the camp of people who are in complete denial about the fact that they are responsible for whatever it is that all the evidence points to they're being responsible for. Okay, the third camp is where we get narcissistic bitchassery. Okay, those deeply insecure bitches. They're such bitches that they don't even know that they're bitches. These are the Elon Musks and the Donald Trumps of the world. I genuinely believe that they believe that all the problems around them are the fault of others. Why do they believe that? Because acknowledging even the possibility that they might be responsible for any of the shit they create is just out of their mental capability, right? It's just too hard to acknowledge that maybe they screwed up, that maybe they didn't measure up to whatever standard they held themselves up to be, that maybe they're not as capable as what they want to believe themselves to be, right? They're in denial because it's too hard to acknowledge reality that maybe they screwed up and all the things that come with it, okay? These are rooted, I'm guessing, in some insecurities about themselves, which is why they not only need to present themselves to the world as being awesome, but also need to see themselves in this way, right? Admitting it not only to other people, but admitting it to themselves is like a very difficult task, right? Admitting that they aren't the shit would be just too hard for them. Their brain would just melt down and wouldn't know what to do with that information. Okay. So they go through life blaming other people and never accepting responsibility, not because they don't want to accept any consequences, but because they can't even bring themselves to acknowledge that they did anything wrong. Like that first step alone is just too hard. Okay. Now, I want to be clear. Everyone has a little bit of all three of these, I think, in them to some degree. Okay. Because the truth is that we all have some insecurities. We all don't want to accept consequences for the things that we've done, right? Like, these are all like comes in varying degrees with each person, right? But there's always a little bit of this as part of the growing process. Children do this. You don't have to even teach children to try to hide from taking responsibility. Like they just naturally do it. It's a normal human thing to have some of this, right? It's just that we just have different insecurities. So it just comes out in different ways for different people. Like I've said, there's always a little bitch in each of us. It's just a matter of degree and impact. I point to Musk and Trump because the impact of their bitch-assetry is pretty big given the kind of money and power they have. But this type of bitch-assetry exists in some degree in all of us, and even, yes, in me, right? I'll tell you one clear place where I've been a bitch in this way. It's actually in my dating and married life. I always wanted to see myself as one of those people that genuinely cared for others, the people that I dated. I wanted to believe that I would never date someone just to boost my own ego, to make me feel like I was a shit. I wanted to believe that I was the kind, genuine person that would only ask someone out if they really wanted to build something meaningful, not just for like some one night stand. When it came to marriage and family life, I believed myself to be a family man committed to marriage and to parenthood. Seeing myself in this way was important for me. It was important for my sense of self, my own identity. So it would make sense that if I did something that jeopardized that view of myself, I would get defensive. And boy, would I get defensive, right? When a relationship of only a few months just completely died, I would never take a second to look at what I had done to let the relationship die, right? I didn't bother to consider my part in why things didn't work out because to do so would mean that I have to consider that maybe I had some part in this thing not working out, right? Instead, I would just say some trope like, oh, this is just how it is sometimes, or it just wasn't the right fit, it wasn't the right person, or maybe something else other than the fact that maybe I neglected building a meaningful connection, or I got too complacent, or something else that I actually had some control over, right? And the same thing carried out in married life as well, right? That defensiveness was actually even worse in married life, right? If I was being financially irresponsible, it was my partner's fault for getting worried about my spending, or it was my partner's fault for making me take on these responsibilities, even though the truth is that like I actually volunteered or maybe even demanded that I handle those responsibilities because I was more or less a control freak, right? If my partner would get mad at me for not doing something I said that I would do, like let's say fix a sink or do the laundry, my mind would immediately go to all the other things that I did for quote unquote us, right? Maybe to show her, but also to myself that I was still a good husband and did my part in the relationship. And because my mind went to those places instead of addressing the thing that I didn't do, right? The things that I was responsible for, right? My emotional response was naturally like resentment towards the partner for making me out to be this kind of guy, right? Which then would lead to all kinds of fights because like I'm feeling resentful. That's going to seep out in some way. It's going to lead me to say something that is very mean, right? That leads to a response, right? Like, and as you get into a fight, right? When my child would get frustrated with me, it was the same kind of story, right? It was a child that was lacking self-control. It was never my own action that contributed in any way to their frustration, right? I think this is a pretty common thing with a lot of parents, right? Because it's hard when you see a kid, you see them as they're not a full grown adult. They're still lacking in a lot of ways. So it's easy to kind of point the finger at them and say, like, hey, the kid is just not grown yet. They need to grow up. Right. But the reality is that kids respond to other people, right? And especially to their primary caregiver. They respond to nonverbal cues, body language, right? Like they respond to whatever it is that the parents are putting out there. So a lot of times when they're frustrated, it could, not saying that it definitely is, but it could be because of something that I'm doing to contribute to it, or at least making it worse, right? But I couldn't allow myself to acknowledge my part, because if I did, it meant that I was being a bad father, right? And so then what do I end up doing? I end up being defensive. I deflect. I basically try not to take responsibility for my part in it. I point my finger at everything else that could be an explanation or a reason as to why things are turning out the way that it is, why my kid is being is frustrated, instead of something that maybe I'm doing, right? So my mind, even without trying, just puts up these mental blocks that prevented me from even considering looking inward and acknowledging my responsibility in all of this. And if the responsibility isn't with me, well, there's only one other place the responsibility can go. It'll be outwards, right? So then I would tend to point my finger to my partners, to my kid, to friends, to society, to whatever else I can conjure up in my mind, except me, right? That's the whole point. I'm being defensive. I'm trying to protect me. So it can't be my fault. It has to be somebody else's, right? Or the excuse better be good enough for everybody else because, I'm not the one responsible for what happened, right? Okay, look, we all have this, okay? It just looks different for everyone, but we all have this. And the worst part is that we don't see it because we hide it from ourselves. Like it's like this built-in mechanism where it's easy for us to deny things to ourselves because it's just hard to look in the mirror and try to acknowledge the hard, cold reality that sometimes it's our fault, right? So then the only ones that can draw it out of draw it out of us are other people who point it out, right? It's like because we have a hard time seeing ourselves kind of objectively, rationally, with clarity. The reality is that a lot of times, not always, it depends on who you have around you, but a lot of times other people probably have a much clearer view of what's going on with us, right? Or what it is that we're up to. But even then, if we are in denial, right, then we won't accept what others tell us. So it's like a double whammy, right? It's like you can't accept it because you can't acknowledge it to yourself, but because you have a hard time acknowledging it to yourself, even when other people point it out, you still have a hard time accepting that that's what's going on, right? And I think here is where you see some cultural differences based on ethnicity, gender, religion, probably other factors. Look, everyone has some insecurities, and it'll often play out in the way that I described in some form or fashion. But the cultural difference is that some are given the space to speak more openly about these insecurities, to make them more visible, not less visible, not to others, but to themselves, right? And other people might just be there as a reflection point to help us better see ourselves, right? I can name some examples, right? Like women in the US, I think maybe globally, but I'm not sure. I'm not a culture anthropologist. Somebody else could, chime in on this, right? But I usually found that women in the US, and from my experience anyways, generally have been far more open and honest in exploring and speaking about their insecurities than men. I don't know exactly why that is. You could ask a sociologist. They probably have some explanation. But there seems to be some difference. From personal experience, certain religious spaces are better about getting people to open up about their shortcomings, to acknowledge their mistakes, taking responsibility for themselves. If you grew up in like a shame-based Asian Christian community, like the one I grew up in under my dad, right? There was actually very little space to be open about our insecurities. But I've learned from like my time at Villanova, especially, and getting more familiar with the Catholic community, that at least in Catholicism, right, confessions is like a regular thing. It's good to confess, right, and so it becomes like almost like a daily, weekly practice to confess, right. So there's this space that's created for there to be a kind of openness without condemnation, without judgment. At least that allows people to be able to kind of explore or to be honest about whatever it is that's going on within them, right? Instead of pointing the finger outward, they could actually take a look inward, right? Um, a lot of men in the U.S. Across a range of other factors, right, don't really have that space. Men often do support and lift each other up with words of affirmation and logistical help, at least from my experience, right? My friends are great about it. If I'm going through a tough time with my kid, I have dads I could turn to that'll understand, provide me with some encouraging words, maybe some advice, right? And I think we all often confuse this with a deeper kind of vulnerability, that a deeper kind of vulnerability that's really required to talk about, deeper insecurities, right? I've never heard a man talk to me about their insecurities about their sex life. I am 100% certain that there at least some women talk to each other about it. I actually know this for sure because they've shared these things, right? That they have these conversations with friends, right? Sharing tips on what they can do or some insecurities they experience in the process, right? Now, I'm not saying that it's like a night and day difference, right? Again, it comes in degrees. It depends on exactly what specific community you're a part of. But I also find that it is much less common to have this sort of vulnerable conversations among men. Okay. I'm not saying that the talk that women have with each other is necessarily good or helpful. It could actually be traumatizing and it could be actually have negative impact. But they do have the conversations, right? And that's the thing that I think have been missing, at least in my conversations with most, let's say, straight, you know, cisgender male. I don't know what the proper labeling here will be, right? But my experience with men. Okay, never. I've never heard of a man talk to each other about their financial insecurities. Like that just never happens. They'll seek out financial advice, right? They'll try to share information with each other, but they will never be vulnerable about struggles that they're going through, right? Or feeling like they weren't enough as a provider. Like these are not the kinds of conversations I've ever had. I've tried to elicit them, right? Um, but the most I get is, I hear men talk about how they can make more money. Heard a lot of that. Not about the feeling side of things where they felt like they weren't enough. Maybe they felt like they were falling short as a father or a husband, right? Okay, I shouldn't say never, but it's very rare. And that's a problem. It's rare. It's extremely rare. And believe me, it is a problem. You don't think it is? Let me ask you, why do so many men feel lonely and depressed? Is it because there aren't other bros around to do stuff together? No. I see men do shit together all the time. In fact, it's actually quite easy for men to connect on some dumb shit like love. I mean, I remember I used to connect with guys over when I was super into scotch, right? I was like, dude, we could just connect over scotch. Like, that's all it took. Sports was an easy one. Games were an easy one, right? Like it didn't take much for guys to get together and do stuff together, right? But here's the thing: doing shit together isn't the same as being open with one another. There's a great skit from Saturday Night Live that you can look up yourself. I'm not going to link it here, right? But I think it's titled like The Straight Male Friend. And the joke in that skit is that the straight male friends are easy to make because they're low investment with regards to your time and energy with zero expectations of being open and sharing real feelings. So it's like low emotional investment as well. But the result is also that you don't get much out of the relationship, right? That friend doesn't even know your birthday, doesn't even know that you have siblings, doesn't care that you'll be gone for the next 6 months, right? And then you pick up right where you left off the next time you see them, just sitting together, doing stuff together, eating food together, watching sports together, and not once having to share real feelings with each other. Look, loneliness is not the same thing as solitude. You can be physically alone, right? By yourself and not feel lonely at all. I'm in solitude most of the day and I don't feel lonely. You feel lonely when you don't feel connected to another person in any intimate way. And doing stuff together isn't the same as building connections. Right? This is a lesson that I had to learn in reflecting on my past romantic relationships, right? That we would do a bunch of stuff together, but were we really building any sort of intimate connection with each other, right? Understanding who each other were, what made each other tick, right? Our history and our life experience that kind of informs why we are the way that we are, right? Being able to understand why your friend would feel a certain way before they even said it, right? If you know them really well, then you could kind of sense how they might react to the kind of different situations they face in life, right? It can be the doing stuff together can be the starting point for building those connections, but they're not the same thing. And until you build real meaningful connections, you're going to continue feeling lonely. You're going to feel like there's no one who gets you, who truly understands you or cares, because just doing stuff together doesn't lead you to feel that sort of deep, sense of being understood, being cared for, being loved. You're going to feel like there's no one who gets you, who truly understands you or cares, but that's not a product of what others did or didn't do. It's a product of you not putting in the time and energy and having that reciprocated in being vulnerable in the ways that are necessary for you to not feel lonely. Okay. So then, how do we as men create space for us to be more open about our insecurities so that we don't hide it, not just from the world, but from ourselves? How do we get to a place where we can start acknowledging our responsibility in any of this and not be afraid to acknowledge responsibility because we're not scared to hide from ourselves in this way? The answer should be obvious. You need to turn to other men, right? As members of a community, we are responsible for that community. Okay, so I'm speaking to like other men here, right? If you're a man or claim to be a man, who knows? You might just be a bitch. Then you need to now step up and live out the life of a man in your community. And what I mean specifically is a community of men. Okay, you and I need to do some part, take some part in creating this space for men. I can't actually tell you how to do this, right? And that's partly because we all operate in different spaces. Your community looks different than mine, right? I don't know if you're like right now listening in some rural area or in the city, if you are surrounded by a certain type of community or another that has its own culture that's different than the one that I am embedded in, right? You know your community better than I do. Okay. So you'll know better what that community will and won't be receptive to. Because the truth is that you could create the space, but you can't make people come, right? So you can't, make men be more open. You can only do your part in trying to create some of these spaces where they feel more comfortable being able to slowly move in that direction. But again, what your community feels comfortable with depends on your community, right? And it's going to be, I'm not going to judge, right? Like it's going to be to a different degree depending on exactly where you're at. But my guess is that it'll be some incremental process. Maybe it starts with having a group of men who first come together for some common interests. Like it could be video games or sport. It honestly doesn't matter, right? So maybe you start by doing stuff together, maybe. Okay. Then slowly taking interest in each other's personal lives, right? And somebody has to do it, right? That's why I always say, like, look, I'm talking to the men in the room, not to the boys, because it's going to be the men who have the capability of stepping up in these cases. And so then the men could step up and kind of, model that for others, you know, sharing a little bit about your personal life. Then from those relationships, maybe inquiring about what each of us are struggling with, and then steering away from all this advice giving stuff, just actually talking about real feelings, right? I imagine you'll need someone to, like I said, step up and start the process of being vulnerable and risk that embarrassment and putting yourself out there, maybe even putting some of your insecurities out there. You could take baby steps, or you could do like, something small to kind of get things going. And then as people feel more comfortable and connected, then you could try to dive a little deeper. You can't just trauma dump on people on day one, right? It's probably not all that different from what I get from students who don't want to ask questions in class, I think. Might be a strange analogy, but I think it works for me, right? Because, there's students who are like not wanting to speak up in class because they're worried that they might look stupid. And I always tell them this, right? Like the one who asks questions, right, who are bold enough to be the first ones to just jump out there, they're the ones that are courageous. They're the ones that we should all, I mean, other students actually look up to them, right? The truth is that whatever question the student had, it was probably something that others were thinking, but were too scared to ask. So it just takes one or two people to just kind of take some of these chances for everyone else to start feeling comfortable to take those chances themselves, right? Like we're like, I think most primates are kind of like this, right? Where we learn from watching other people do something rather than from what we are told that we should do, right? So it helps us see someone take these chances because then we start feeling more comfortable taking these chances as well. Um, I'm guessing in a similar way, you're going to need at least a few men to be brave enough to step out and be willing to maybe even possibly make a fool of themselves, so that, you know, others can feel more comfortable to be open and vulnerable in this way. I personally was lucky enough to meet men like this in my life. Even my dad in his later years, was a bit like this, right? But all of this is bound to fail until we collectively as men come to realize the importance of prioritizing our role as men in a community, right? Nobody here, at least not, you're not going to hear from me, is going to tell you to not be a man in the community. What I've been trying to do is not to discourage you from being a man. What I've been trying to encourage you to do is to be a real man and not a bitch, right? And being a real man means being vulnerable in this way and being the one to be courageous, to take a step, be vulnerable, be willing to make a fool of yourself, be willing to be hurt, not get the best response from people around you, in the hopes that you can actually, you know, create that space where other people might start thinking, hey, you know, there's at least one person who's willing to put themselves out there in this way. Maybe it's something that I am able to do and I'm a little less scared to do because I can see that others have done it as well, right? And it's not the end of the world. Each and every one of you is needed. I can't stress this enough. You're needed to be present and active in your community, needed to be a better role model, needed to be healed and grown, needed to create this new culture that is better for the newer generation of men. Okay. If you want something more actionable, let me just make it fairly simple, right? Ask yourself if you ever have other men that you are close to, ones that you think would be open to deepening the relationship by being more open and vulnerable with each other. Then just be intentional in how you spend time with each other, right? What I mean is don't just plan activities together. At some point, also speak to each other, right? Don't do stuff just side by side. Just intentionally take time to just speak to each other. So you might have people that you've known for a really long time that you feel very comfortable with, and it might feel a little uncomfortable because you might be breaking the mold of what you're used to doing with them, but actually face them and have a conversation with them, right? Like go out for a brunch date and, you know, have a real conversation about life. What do you actually know about that person, right? Do you actually know anything about their recent struggles, their recent highs, their joys, right? What about their family and personal history? Do you check in with each other knowing that they're going through something, right? You know, how good does it feel if you get a call, somebody just saying, hey, I'm thinking of you, I care about you, I just want to see how you're doing. You might be doing great, but I just wanted to, you know, just hear from you, hear your voice. How great does that feel, right? It could be maybe even your neighbors if it's not somebody that you've known for a really long time, but you've encountered them, your acquaintances with them have been for a while, right? You don't need to do all this all the time, right? Like, you know, but at least start, right? Make it a priority. And that's all I'm saying, right? Make it a priority. Just like you make work, family, finance, hobbies, all these things a priority, make this a priority. Make it a priority. And by making it a priority, all I mean is that you're not passive about it, right? You get off your ass and do something. You join a club or activity, you create a chat group, you set aside time and mental energy to spend quality time with other men. I realized as I was actually creating this, I didn't know any of my neighbors, right? But I do see a bunch of kids running around and know that some of them go to the local like public schools that are within walking distance here. So I'm personally working right now to get connected with them and their parents to see if there's any way we can support each other, especially the boys in the neighborhood, knowing that each of us probably have something different to offer. Maybe this neighborhood can be one where people actually know each other. That'll be really nice, right? I would love it if I knew the other dads in this community, if only to talk about how dad life is, right? Both the highs and the lows, and then just be there to have a listening ear of somebody who knows what it's like to go through it, right? But again, you need to do it, right? No one is coming. No one is coming to save you. Like I, I don't know if I've said this already, but I'm probably going to repeat it again and again. Like no one is coming to save you, and definitely not women, right? So if no one else is coming to save you, then who's going to have to do the work? You need to start taking responsibility, right? Other men can create spaces for you to participate and they can do their part, but even then, you need to participate. You need to put yourself out there. You need to take a step forward. You need to take chances. And if there isn't that space available in your circle, in your community, then you need to create that space. Like you're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for creating a community that works for you. Okay. Let me add one final note on why it's important that men take responsibility for their own shit. As I have said, it's better for men because they can address their own loneliness, depression, anxiety, and so on, right? You'll also probably feel a lot more empowered because you can see what you need to work on and then work on it instead of just living in denial, right? Like if you are in denial of the problem, you're not like, what is it? What is it in Alcoholics Anonymous? So like the first step is to acknowledge that you have a problem, right? Like if you can't see what's going on in you, that's the root of the problem. Like if you don't, you're not going to address it because you're not even acknowledging the problem, right? So, one of the things that actually for me has been very empowering, if anything, is acknowledging my shortcomings because then I feel like, okay, now that I know what the issue is, I feel a little bit more in control of myself. I feel like there's something I can actually do about it, right? And yes, if you're taking responsibility for your own decisions, you also don't push off consequences of your bad decisions onto others. So there's a lot of benefits to just taking ownership over yourself, right? But there's still another benefit. Like when you take responsibility for yourself, you end up building up the people around you. And this might be intentional or not, but this is something that just kind of ends up happening, right? How so? One of the ways we make people feel less than, right, is by dismissing them, by ignoring or diminishing the significance of their concerns, complaints, or contributions, right? But here's the thing, when we are willing to take responsibility, we put down those walls that automatically come up to kind of protect ourselves from acknowledging our shortcomings, which means that we are more likely to consider to make room for others, for their thoughts and feelings, or in other words, like, look, we are less likely to shut other people down, but instead willing to actually hear them out, right? Like, look, one of the things I talked about with regards to my own experience, right, is in these relationships, I had a hard time hearing criticism, right? Why? Because I had my defenses up. But when the defenses come down, it's much easier to hear other people's genuine concern, their grievances, why they're hurt. I could actually hear what they're saying, understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, and acknowledge it instead of just dismissing them because I don't have my defenses up. I'm not saying you need to agree with everyone else, but people generally feel terrible, low, insecure, all kinds of ways when their thoughts and feelings are just tossed aside like they don't matter, right? That's the part that I think hurts a lot of people. Okay. It's a different level of terrible that you feel when you're dismissed in this way than when somebody just simply disagrees with you. When somebody disagrees with you, it's just we disagree about something. You believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. We don't see eye to eye on something. It happens, right? This is just like a natural part of life. We have disagreements, right? But it's just a downright awful feeling when somebody doesn't even consider what it is you have to say, right? They didn't even consider it enough to disagree with you. They just dismiss it outright from the very beginning, right? Take the workplace as an example. How many times have employees at companies complained about feeling overlooked? Is this really just about a paycheck? And my guess, honestly, is that it's not, right? Employees feel like shit when the management of that business don't value their input. both good and bad, right? Like you don't need to necessarily agree. Like the managers don't have to do whatever it is that the employees say that they should do, right? But the fact that their input isn't even valued, well, it's like, well, you're, what am I to you in this company? I feel like just like some object. That's what people feel like, right? Good managers actually know this, right? Good managers know that people want to feel heard, that they want to feel like, what they had to say was taken seriously, that they're contributing to the overall goal that the company might have. It's a big factor in employee satisfaction. It's the same in relationships, all relationships, right? People want their friends, significant others, children, parents to hear them out, to take in what they have to say, to give it due consideration. And it's hard to do that if you have your defenses up. Like if you're constantly trying to defend against possible, like, slights against you, right? If you're always just itching for a fight, you can't hear what the other person actually has to say, like good, bad, or otherwise, right? But if you're the kind of person who is willing to accept responsibility, then you welcome what other people have to say, even if it doesn't always feel good. And when you do that for others, then they feel seen and heard, and it breaks down barriers instead of building, breaks down these barriers, and instead it just builds up, connections. It makes them feel like they were heard. It feels like they were heard specifically by you, right? And whatever issue that they had, the fact that they were at least heard, at least some of their feelings are probably going to be resolved. I'll leave you with this. I firmly believe that you will see yourself differently and others will respond to you differently when you take ownership of yourself. This is what I've learned from years of going to therapy and just seeing my life change from making these sorts of adjustments. And I firmly believe that you're capable of doing so. Like I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not easy. It's hard as fuck. Like because it means that you have to look inward and dig up all the parts of you that you don't like about yourself, and that is painful as hell. Like I still have memories of the first few years of therapy where I was digging through all of my own shit, and there'd be days I would come home and I just cried for hours and then just passed out because my brain just like it was just so hard to kind of see myself honestly in this way, to even be able to talk about myself honestly in this way. But I believe that you have the ability and the courage to do it. And I can promise you that when you come out the other end, you will be a better man for it. And it's not just that you will feel it yourself, it's that others will be able to see that as well. Because you end up moving through life differently. When you take full ownership of yourself, you are really in control of yourself. You're not being swayed and moved by the world, but you are directing your life in the way that you see fit. You take ownership of your own mistakes, and people respect that, right? So you're going to see other people respond to you differently as well. And I can't stress this enough. You're more than capable. And so I am genuinely excited for the man you will become once you do make it through that difficult process. I just hope that you start that journey sooner rather than later. Boys, other men are depending on it.